Hey, Rich Lowry of National Review here. Let's talk about the American Revolution because it's been fashionable in recent years to tear down the revolution. The New York Times 1619 Project advanced the idea of the true founding of the country not in 1776, but in 1619, and it was a nation wholly devoted to the practice of slavery. Some people think that Juneteenth should overtake July 4th in importance, and of course, during the BLM riots, we saw the statues of founders around the country torn down. All this is so grievously wrong, so ungrateful, and so destructive. Ours is the greatest revolution the world has ever known. It began to eclipse systems based on monarchs and aristocrats. It established a small R Republican government that inspired Republican movements around the world, and most importantly, established the independence of a nation whose powers and ideals would shape the world for the better. Now, none of this is to understate the violence and at times the brutality of this multi-dimensional conflict during the revolution that lasted for years. More Americans died per capita during the American Revolution than in any other conflict except for the American Civil War. But there was nothing like the bloodletting you saw, say, in 1793 in the Vendée during the French Revolution, when royalist resistance in that western part of France was crushed by the revolutionaries in a blood-curdling, disgusting fashion. And there was nothing like the terrors we saw in the communist revolutions of the 20th century. George Washington, the military leader of the revolution, of course, had no interest in ruling on his own, no interest in becoming a military dictator. In fact, when there was a potential military coup in 1783 from his own rest of troops, he talked them down. He backed them down at Newburgh. In contrast to the leaders of other revolutions, the leaders of the American Revolution died peacefully in their own beds. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson became fierce, hateful even, opponents in the aftermath of the revolution. But then later in their lives, they struck up a friendly and respectful correspondence, and they died on the same July 4th, 50 years after the revolution, and what was taken by many at the time to be a providential sign about America. Now, when politics factionalized after the revolution, which was natural, no one was guillotined, no one was exiled. These disputes played out at the ballot box and in the pages of the newspapers. The revolution didn't seek to wipe out all that had come before. There was no year zero in the American Revolution the way you've seen in other revolutions. And there's this really important balance at the heart of it. The idealism, Thomas Paine wrote that we have the power to make the world anew, was balanced with a realism about human nature. James Madison writes there's a certain degree of depravity in mankind. And in part because of this, the revolution and its achievements were enduring. You look at other revolutions, whether it's Mexico or France or many others, and they were never able to establish stability after that revolutionary spasm. System of government after system of government falls. But the American Revolution endured and has endured now for nearly 250 years. And make no mistake, this was an achievement of world historical significance. The historian Jonathan Israel points out how the American Revolution was the beginning of the end of the early modern world, characterized by kings and queens and aristocrats and serfs and slaves and mercantilist colonial empires. Instead, this was the start of the modern world as we have come to know it. Now, of course, no one can deny that our vaulting ideals that were set out at the outset of the revolution were incompletely realized, but we should not neglect how much progress was made even on the issue of slavery right around 1776. You saw slavery abolished in the northern states. And pretty soon after the revolution, you get the end of the Atlantic slave trade. Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest orators and writers and statesmen in American history, gave a famous speech excoriating the founders and the country for not living up to its ideals. In 1852, he asked, "What is July 4th to the slave?" But even Frederick Douglass realized the greatness of the revolution and the men who had forged it. It does not often happen to a nation to raise up so many great men at one time, he said. He said their vision stretched beyond the present to a distant future. He said that they seized on eternal principles and set a glorious example in their defense. Mark them, Frederick Douglass said, and he was absolutely right. Happy July 4th, everyone, and God bless America.